We've been talking a lot about The Killing Joke these past few weeks. We've discussed misconceptions about the book and the meaning behind its mysterious ending, but at the heart of it all is writer Alan Moore and artist Brian Bolland, who brought this piece of art to life. They know what happened during the final panels, they know what story they were trying to tell. However, if you recall, Moore once said about the story, quote, "I don't think it's a very good book. It's not saying anything very interesting," end quote. And yet, here we are, 3 videos later, 4 if you want to count the Batgirl sex scene from the movie, which, you know, not many people do. But the point remains, clearly the story is interesting. It's a critically acclaimed award-winning comic, yet Moore dismisses it as pretty much garbage. And even Bolland wasn't happy with the initial release of the comic. That's why he went and recolored the whole thing. They might be the authors of The Killing Joke, but do their opinions and intent even matter that much? As this is the final part of our 3-part saga on The Killing Joke, I would like to remind everyone that parts 1 and 2 are right up there and in the description down below. It's been a few weeks, so let's do a quick recap. We discussed a few fan theories surrounding The Killing Joke, including an idea popularized by Grant Morrison that Batman kills the Joker, as well as Julian Darius's theory about how Batman stabs Joker with the clown's own poison needle. But we also learned what exactly Alan Moore intended the ending of the book to be. According to The Killing Joke script, quote, "They are now both helpless with laughter and have collapsed forward onto each other, both ragged and bloody, each holding the other up as they stand there clinging together in the rain," end quote. So does this mean that all those interesting interpretations we've discussed so far are just meaningless? I mean, we have what looks to be our answer. The text tells us what happens. Is it pointless to speculate our own understanding of that iconic story? Of course not. Which is why I said in part 1, I'm not saying that you can't interpret Joker dying at the hands of Batman simply because Moore didn't explicitly write that. But wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, right? Shouldn't we be trying to find out what the author says and cite that as the ultimate meaning of a comic book or novel or movie or whatever? Doesn't an author get the final say on their own work? I mean, sure, we could have our own interpretations of why Batman is looking at his hand in this panel or what exactly Joker's joke means, but none of that holds any weight compared to anything Moore and Bolland say about it, right? That sounds like an intuitive idea, but philosopher and literary theorist Roland Barthes disagreed with this notion in his 1967 essay, The Death of the Author. In it, Barthes explains that an author's interpretation of their work is absolutely valid, but no more valid than ours as the readers. Comics are meant to be read, so we as the readers should be the ones to find meaning in a work. Or, as John Green puts it,
because the book does not exist for the benefit of the author, the book exists for the benefit of you.
And again, I want to stress here that this does not say that an author's intent is meaningless. It is indeed valuable, but what they believe the meaning of their work to be is not the interpretation, but an interpretation. For example, Moore once explained his interpretation of the comic as this, quote, "The Killing Joke is a story about Batman and the Joker. It isn't about anything that you're ever going to encounter in real life because Batman and the Joker are not like any human beings that have ever lived. So there's no important human information being imparted. Yeah, it was something that I thought was clumsy, misjudged, and had no real human importance. It was just about a couple of licensed DC characters that didn't really relate to the real world in any way." That seems completely absurd. No important human information being departed, no real human importance? I asked you guys on Twitter and got dozens of different responses for applicable life lessons learned from The Killing Joke. Even if Moore never intended for them to be in the story, they're still there. Are we just supposed to ignore them because it was never his intent? Of course not. His intent doesn't matter. Now, if your goal is to specifically find out what Moore and Bolland actually intended for The Killing Joke, then yeah, their perspectives might be useful to you in that particular pursuit. But if you're simply looking for meaning in the comic itself, you don't need anything but the comic itself. Before you get your pitchforks ready, this does not mean, however, that every interpretation is valid. If theories and headcanon are based on flawed understandings of the text, then they are also flawed. I also can't just propose an interpretation that is completely random with nothing in the text to support it. For example, I can't say that at the end of The Killing Joke, Joker suddenly turns into R2-D2 and beat boops away as Batman stares in awe, silently finishing his tuna fish sandwich he'd been saving in his utility belt. Thus, the story is meant to be an allegory for the dangers of commercialism. That is is nonsense. The idea here is not that every single interpretation is created equal, no matter how absurd it is, but rather the simple idea that the author's own interpretation of his or her own work isn't that special. You can also see how little authorial intent seems to matter by looking at the comic book industry itself. In a field filled with reboots, alternate universes, retcons, and just so much Deus Ex Machina. Just so much. One can't help but feel if anything being written in the comics right now will even matter in the future. Besides all the big universe-altering events, comic book characters get tossed around from one creative team to the next constantly. Even a simple change in writers or artists can make Batman feel like a completely different character, effectively undoing everything the previous authors attempted to do with the character. But that's just how it is in the world of big-time funny books, lamented comics writer Eric Larson in an article he wrote regarding the time he almost made Elektra a Skrull, a story that we actually covered on this channel before. The creative baton gets handed off to the next runner, and the next runner can take it anywhere he's allowed to by the powers that be, even if it means undermining the efforts of those who came before him. But, all's fair, his stories will inevitably be undone by the next guy. It wasn't just that every character seemed to get a new voice and personality and face and physique when handed from one creative team to the next, but often everything that came before was ignored, contradicted, or written off as somehow not real. It's at a point where I can no longer believe that these characters are the same people anymore, and it's to a point where I can't get caught up in their adventures because I know that somewhere down the line, whatever had happened will be tossed out the window, just as everything else had been countless times before. Of course, this is mainly applicable for the big two publishers. Creator-owned comics can be a little better about this by having one writer, and the internal logic of the characters in the world they inhabit more often remains intact. But when you open that world up to be a shared universe with countless authors contributing new stories every single week, toes are going to be stepped on. Remember, despite what you may have heard, The Killing Joke was always meant to be canon, so Moore and Bolland were tasked with creating a story in a universe they shared with everyone else at DC Comics. Even still, they left a lot of the story elements open-ended for the next creative team to pick up and do whatever they want with it, regardless of what Moore may have intended. That team just so happened to be husband and wife duo John Ostrander and Kim Yale, who were working on Suicide Squad at the time, and they absolutely hated what Moore and Bolland did to Barbara in their story, so they took it upon themselves to transform her into the computer hacking intelligence gathering Oracle. There's no hiding the massive popularity of Oracle, but it's not like Moore intended for Babs to take on that new identity when he made Joker shoot her. Ostrander and Yale took it upon themselves to fix what they thought Moore had ruined. It's a double-edged sword, right? Sure, the nature of comic books can make an author question whether or not it's worth putting so much effort into a story when it will likely be ignored and become undone by the next author to tackle the character. But that same disregard for authorial intent is also what can fuel great stories like Under the Red Hood or Winter Soldier or any of the Rebirth stuff going on right now. Authors who worked or are currently working on those books were at one point just like you and me. Readers who realize the original author's intent is not law. There's always some wiggle room. And for the sake of opening this very video up for interpretation, let's bring someone else in here, someone who's skilled at breaking down the meanings behind comic books.
Hello, I'm Haas from the YouTube channel Strip Panel Naked, where we do weekly videos breaking down comics art. But I'm just popping in to add my 2 cents, as the meaning behind the work is something I find really interesting in comics. The intent from an author in a piece of work is always fascinating, because any art with intent, be it just to tell a good story or to change the world, will be read by people who are bringing their own individual baggage to the story. It means that if both, say, Scott and myself read a comic like The Killing Joke, regardless of if Alan Moore said it wasn't saying anything very interesting, we both walk away from that with our own interpretations and meanings. But what's interesting is those interpretations will undoubtedly be different, in huge or subtle ways, because we bring our own individual life experiences to our readings of it. And that's why I consider it a flawed response to say that a book inherently isn't very interesting. I mean, how many times have you seen a bad review for a movie or book that you really liked? But if I read a book and bring with it my own experiences, vastly different to that of the author and vastly different to that of the other readers, I take my own meaning from the book, implied through a story. So for me, The Killing Joke was more about dealing with the problem of an unfaceable, unspeakable evil. When you have to deal with something that seems so unstoppable, so insurmountable, how do you approach that? Was that the reason Moore told this story? By all accounts, and from his very mouth, no, it wasn't. The other question though is, does it invalidate my reaction and response to it? But that's the reason why artists create art in the first place, right? To get a reaction from an audience. You know, the idea of art is to provoke, to allow us to examine and to understand. And if the work opens up other doors to a reader that isn't in the author's initial intent, why should that make any genuine human understanding derived from it less real?
An author doesn't get the final say on their work. An author gets the first say, and then releases it to the world for us to interpret through our own experiences, knowledge, beliefs, and culture. Thanks for the wise words, Haas. People might not know this, but you have a brand new show right here on NerdSync, right?
I do indeed. It's called Comic-Ana, and in each episode I take an in-depth look at a part of the craft of storytelling in comics. In the first episode, we looked at how you control pacing through panel design and dialogue, and in the latest episode, we talk through how speech balloon and caption placement plays a role in guiding your eye through a page. That episode is available right now, linked in the description a day early for those of you watching. Check it out, and I'll see you over there.
Sounds great. In the meantime, I'd love to know what you guys think about all this. How much does authorial intent really matter? Does the comic book industry even allow it to matter? And what does the Killing Joke mean to you? Let's talk about it all in the comments down below. If you like this 3-part series on the Killing Joke, go ahead and give this video a like. And if you missed the first 2 parts or just want to watch them again, you can check them out right here in one convenient playlist. In part 1, we bust Grant Morrison's theory about how Alan Moore always intended for Batman to kill Joker and learn a little bit more about the development of the Killing Joke comic. Part 2 was about an insanely cool theory you may not have heard of before. Was Joker really paralyzed at the end of the story to mirror what he did to Barbara? Click right here to find out. And once again, check out the latest episode of Comic-Ana and show Haas some love. If you're new here, make sure you hit that big sexy subscribe button so you don't miss out on all the new videos we make for you every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday that explore the history, science, art, and philosophy behind your favorite comic book superheroes. Until next time, my name is Scott, reminding you to read between the panels and grow smarter through comics. See ya.